Hey everyone, this is Chris Ryan from The Ringer. As many of you have heard by now, we lost a treasured colleague and friend over the weekend. Jonathan Tjarks passed away on Saturday. John was 34. He leaves behind a wife and a son, and we are obviously mourning his loss and sending all of our love to his family right now. If you go to theringer.com/Jonathan Tjarks, that's JONATHANTJARKS, you will find a memorial page for John, which has links to his GoFundMe that benefits his family and the amazing writing he did throughout his experience. I encourage you to go there, and if you can, please support the Tjarks family. Briefly, I will just say that John was among the first people that we hired to work for The Ringer, so he was instrumental in defining the voice and perspective of the site. He has as much to do with what this place is as anyone else. And throughout his experience with cancer, John communicated eloquently about the challenges he was facing, both through his writing and his podcasting. You could never stop John from talking about his passions. It's one of the things I loved about him. Over the last few months, whenever we would talk, whenever I would reach out to see how he was doing, I would try to keep it very John focused. And the next thing I knew, we would be talking about James Harden or Better Call Saul. He really loved this stuff. He loved talking about it, celebrating it, debating it, illuminating it. We're going to keep putting out our pods and writing while we grieve, but we wanted to let folks know that John was in our hearts and that his family was in our thoughts. Thanks for listening.
This episode is brought to you by Anytime Fitness. We may talk a whole lot about sports, but when it comes to keeping fit ourselves, there's definitely room for improvement. I hit this point early July. I was just like, I am not in good enough shape. I started trying to walk at least 15,000 steps a day or hiking or just anything to keep my legs moving. Now it's the end of 2023. I feel great. I had a physical 3 weeks ago, and the guy was like, you're doing great. You're doing better than you were 3 years ago. I felt great. Whatever your goals are, progress is possible thanks to Anytime Fitness. Get a personalized plan and support from an expert coach anytime, anywhere. Visit anytimefitness.com to try Anytime Fitness for free. Start to train for your life. Terms, conditions, and restrictions apply. See website for details. This episode is brought to you by Atlassian. Atlassian software like Jira, Confluence, and Trello help power global collaboration for all teams so they can accomplish everything that's impossible alone. Because individually we're great, but together we're so much better. Learn how to unleash the potential of your team at Atlassian.com. Atlassian.com. Atlassian. Tap the banner or visit this episode's page to learn more.
I need support staff to clear the room. Stand up and walk now.
Hello and welcome to The Watch. My name is Chris Ryan. I am an editor at theringer.com, and joining me on the other line, he knows something of the hour of the owl. It's Andy Greenwald.
The hour of the owl. Why don't you just say 3 a.m.?
I don't know. Do you think that they have regular time in Westeros? Do you think they just break out the Audemars and they're just like, oh, it's 1:30. It's time for a feast?
What I'm curious about is that let's assume that it's just a colloquial place, right? Like, the spirit of poetry burns bright within the houses of the dragons.
Sure.
No evidence of that yet, but at least in terms of the timekeeping. I just feel like that would be challenging because every region would have its own hour. Like, for us, we'd be like, Chris, well met. It is the hour of Wawa. And then we would all eat hoagies. And we'd know that would mean dinner time, right? Or lunchtime.
Or in Los Angeles, it would be like, good morrow, Andy. It is it's the first of 9 traffic jams of the day.
Yes. It is the hour of the hellscape between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m.
Andy, today we're going to talk a lot about House of the Dragon, episode 4, The King of the Narrow Sea. We'll chat a little bit about episode 3 of Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power. And I like to think of these shows now, this first show of the week it's me getting to chat with my old friend Bastion from Neverending Story. You're just a bibliophile. You're just like sitting there and you got your big book of fantasy and high adventure stories. And it's what I always dreamed of for you.
I'm hiding from the bullies upstairs at school. I'm impressed that you got to make the first beloved 80s film reference, because I was going to say this episode of House of the Dragon is the one that finally turned all of America into Principal Rooney from Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
So just being like, how they do things in that family.
Oh, so that's how it is. Okay. Got it.
Okay, so we got, probably our weekly dose of incest in this episode of HOTT.
I mean, the week is young. The week is young, Chris, but please go on.
That's
yes.
What did you think of the episode?
Well, I'm of two minds. I'm of two minds about the episode. You know, first of all, longtime listeners of this podcast in whatever form it takes know that all I want from a Game of Thrones show is a walk through a night market. You know, that's what I want. It was a joke, but it's also not a joke because it is precisely the kind of specificity and world building that I think shows need, particularly shows that have felt so claustrophobic as House of the Dragon has felt. So I appreciated that aspect of the show. I was glad to spend time with at least as much as the Game of Thrones universe in its current form seems interested in the emotional, mechanisms of these characters. I was appreciating that. Perhaps a little frustrated with where it ended up, but there are individual performances and things that I liked quite a bit. And I don't know if I ever said this on camera.
Because you're shipping Daemon and Rhaenyra so hard, and you're so frustrated with those guys having more obstacles.
Always. Cool uncles is just like, that's just, it's just at least this is, there's some things that the show has done where I'm like, what are you teaching me about the human condition? And then there's things like the niece and uncle relationship where I'm like, thank you. I have learned too much about the human condition. I will go back to my crab farm. I guess what I want to start with this episode was appreciation that we finally got to see brought to the screen King's Landing's famous circus district. Now, we've seen the spice markets, we've seen the whorehouses, we've seen the sewer system.
Pleasure houses, by the way. I don't think they're referred to as whorehouses. Brothels or pleasure houses.
Yeah. That is out of date, and I acknowledge that, and I apologize.
Okay.
Pleasure houses. A pleasure house for me, an old bookstore. But, we age out of certain... we spend our hours of the owl differently as we get older. But, the famous circus district, Mallory and Jason used to talk about it all the time, right? That there's a certain lane you can walk down in King's Landing.
Is this a well-known district of King's Landing?
Right? Do we know? You kind of believe me, right? I'm absolutely bullshitting, but you kind of believe me that if you took a left, you leave the castle, you take a left, right? And when you see the fire breather, you keep going. They got it. I wish that there was a Stefan for this, There's old Zoltar machines. There's jugglers. It's great.
I think you spent a lot of time in the circus district of Copenhagen, right?
I did, but only at the hour of the owl. They actually they call it the hour of the fermented squash.
Right.
And it's delicious.
You mentioned the home that largely is the setting for this episode. Yes. And I think that we didn't really get a chance to talk about episode 3 that much, directed by Greg Yatanis, but I talked a little bit about this with Mallory and Joanna. And I mentioned how I felt like my senses come alive as these characters moved outdoors to their woodsy sort of celebration of Aegon's name day and having this pop-up restaurant, in the middle of the forest run by the Lannisters. It champagne's being handed out as they walk in. There's the hunt. There's different color schemes going on in terms of the lighting and everything.
They played Boar on the Floor.
They did. But that was I think that really taught me something about one of my reactions to the show, which is a show that I like a lot, but am having a little bit of clock watching when it comes to, this is an episode, no set pieces, no escape from the castle, really, except for Rhaenyra's run down this night market of pleasures and it looks like raw horse meat that she ate. What was the sort of dish?
And then, buddy, why
Trader
go to
Joe's offer samples
Chris,
that they had?
Why go to a night market when you can just have night at home?
That's right.
You know what I mean?
That's right. And I don't remember ever having this reaction to Cersei's castle in Game of Thrones or Joffrey's or whoever you want to say that it was theirs. But I'm having it in this show where I'm just feel like we've been in these rooms a lot, especially the small council room, which I guess that also was the case for Game of Thrones, but there was enough fireworks happening outside of that room that it felt like balance. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, look. Here's the thing. We will talk about the positives, of which I think there were a number of them. I think the performances continue to be carrying the show almost more than anything else. But I would point to the scene when Rhaenyra returns from her sojourns and her unclely wanderings and seduces her dude, Sir. What's his name? Sir
Kristen.
Sir Kristen. And Millie Alcock, who's been delivering a great performance, suddenly comes alive and is allowed to play different keys on the acting keyboard and is playful and is flirtatious and is just sort of, I'll say it, alive, lively. And it was really fun. And it was fun not just because I got the sense that the actor was enjoying the experience, but that it was a different tone that we've seen in the show thus far. And it was so welcome. And it was just making me think that this might be a little bit pessimistic, but the volume, and when I say the volume again, it's the Mandalorian wall, that is being used by more and more productions to enhance, but also streamline the CGI.
Yeah.
Not to make too big a deal about it metaphorically, but what it does is it gives you the illusion of depth. And I'm starting to worry that is actually a metaphor you could wrap around this generation of CGI IP shows. Because this episode, was on the high seas, and then it was in a teeming market, and it did travel outside of the rooms of power more than the first two did, right? The last two episodes have done that. But it didn't actually give us any specificity in those places. They were in the ocean, and Sir Kristen's like, we're going to be home a month early. It's like, okay, well, we were just in a room, and now we're going to be on a boat, and then we're going to be back in the old rooms.
I think that's supposed to be one of their time jump mechanisms, but yeah, I know what you mean.
Sure, but now when you go out into the world, there's just writhing bodies that are visual, adults-only, analogies for an option or a road not taken. There's no person representing that. There's no character who's just like, I live here and it's cool. You don't have to live in the castle, or you could make a different choice.
That's Steve.
Yeah, hey, look at Steve.
Steve comes here every night.
Steve's busy right now. Steve's got his hands full. But do you know what I'm saying here? And I am struggling with that because the feeling of the show thus far, it's hard to escape that these are merely well-performed and well-drawn placeholders in a historical recreation, in a historical meaning, a fictional history based on George R. R. Martin's world. I have yet to find the show's purpose in terms of these specific people, what makes them interesting and unique, and why I am invested in them. The show seems to be using its genre as a little bit of a hedge to say that, to quote unquote, teach us things or reveal things that actually don't seem that surprising after, 10 plus years of Thrones, but also 40 plus years of human experience, such as about the role of women or what marriage could be used for, or, a lot of effort to get to those places.
I'm going to talk about the incest sex scene or near sex scene for a second here. And it's funny that that to me was one of the more thrilling parts of the show, even though I feel disgusting for saying that, because the psychology of the characters before, during, and after that sequence was pretty, there was a lot of ambiguity. It was are they super into each other? Is she into him and he's using her? Why can't he perform? Was she then so turned on that she immediately went back to the guy that she does or maybe doesn't want to be with? There was all this sort of it was almost like, what if Brian De Palma made Game of Thrones for 15 minutes there? And I don't think that that's sustainable. And I don't think that that would be palatable to a mass audience. People aren't there for that necessarily. They're there for dragons and they're there for epic storytelling. But that was one of the first times where I was like, ooh, this is kind of almost flying without the radar on at this point. I have no idea where this is going here. And also within the sort of realm of this show, how you're supposed to feel about obviously something that's incredibly taboo and all that. But within this show, I'm is this is this all good? Like, are we supposed to be like rooting for Damon and Rhaenyra here? Like,
well,
I don't.
I think that's a great point, and I agree with you. Like, there are moments in the show when it goes not just off the map of what we're expecting, but maybe off the map of decency and what we all should be seeing. And I kind of applaud it for continuing Game of Thrones, great history of being super gnarl. But I continue to think that it's kind of a this is an analogy we've used before, but when you make a show, you lay down your stakes of your fence. And this is the patch that the show is going to exist in. And that's often a more complicated decision than it may seem. And I continue to think that maybe this show has framed things slightly incorrectly for the larger audience than the George R. R. Martin obsessives. Do you remember the great John Mulaney bit that he did after Trump was elected, which was called Horse in the Hospital? Yeah. Where he was like, the thing about the Trump presidency is not that this is a weird, insane lunatic who is now president. It's that there is a horse in a hospital running wild, and we don't know what to do because the horse is in the hospital. The Targaryens being the rulers of this world is kind of like a horse in the hospital, but the show is told from the perspective of the horses, who are like, we live in this hospital and it's great, and we can go in all the rooms because we're horses. There's only a small sideways reference in this episode to the Targaryens' curious history about boffing their relatives.
Yeah, Damon's like, this is totally actually within the realm of accepted Targaryen behavior.
When we got down on street level in what's it called again? Flea Bottom. Yeah. I assume that's where they are.
Yeah, sure.
No, I'm sorry. They were in the theater district. Forgive me. It was but it was more off Broadway. It was like a little bit like La Mama down in the Village. When you get down there, I kind of was hoping that the Punch and Judy show that would be put on would be less about the people being like, we don't want a lady king, which has been, we get that.
Historically, yeah.
I kind
hostile
of
towards
wish
female leadership. Yeah.
I'd like to know a little bit more about how they feel about these lunatic Aryan Targaryens with their dragons, who I guess sleep with each other a lot, or at least plausibly consider marrying their daughters to their newborn sons.
Right.
Like, that's perverse and weird and seems like flawed. And I just miss that perspective on the world. And it is, I'll just keep saying, it's a Tyrion thing, right? I just want a Tyrion.
Yeah. And then I think also at least right now, the choice to focus on 3 or 4 characters in depth rather than 9 across the board. And I think that this is actually, Mal and I talked a little bit about this with the Lord of the Rings show. But the thing that I actually enjoy about Rings of Power is that, if you don't like this, if you're not vibing with this part, guess what? In 3 minutes, they're going to a whole other part.
It's like the weather in San Francisco.
Exactly. Bring a sweater or throw it in the trash. Who cares? It's just you're gonna need both.
And also, all those guys have hairy feet.
Right.
It's actually very much like San Francisco. Go on.
But when you go to when you watch Game of Thrones, and let's say you find the Cersei Jaime relationship stomach turning, even though that show very wisely in retrospect kept those two apart for a majority of the series. But let's say that's you watch the first episode and you get straight up incest between twins. That was like a real cold water splash when you first.
And you shipped it, by the way.
Well, here's the thing. First of all, they allowed those two people to be incredibly charismatic with one another.
Look at Chris on his back foot. He's already got his talking points.
No, my point is that then the other side of it was Prince Charming. Rob was still in this show. You know what I mean?
Right.
They had all this wide variety of characters. And as the show went along, you got to see, this person is as morally corruptible as this person who I thought was bad, and the Tyrion arc and the Rob arc and the Jon arc and the Dany arc and Jaime and Cersei and everybody else winds up starting to kind of draw. It's not just it's one of the tapestries that they try to get Daemon to go look at. It's it needs to be widescreen. And I hope we're going there.
Well, I think that you're making the right point, but I also think that our critiques are more broad than just about this show. This is actually a conversation about the state of IP television, as it often is. When you make a cup of tea with a tea bag, it is fantastic. It is full of the flavor of the tea. Then maybe later you want more tea. You were like, maybe I can get a little more flavor out of this bag. going to be a little bit weaker.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it is inevitably the case when you keep going back to the same source material. It is not going to be as good as the first time or as full flavor.
Guy?
No, but I've been in Europe recently, so I'm trying on some new affectations. I would also say that it's an issue of the difference between a show and an expanded universe. Game of Thrones, both in terms of its storytelling scope, but also what it could do in terms of establishing a beachhead for an entire universe and world and type of storytelling and brand, it could be all of the stories. There's an intentional pivot now, because there are going to be more of them, for each of these shows to be more specialized and tell a story. So it cannot, just by nature, be as expansive or as all-inclusive as a Game of Thrones was. And that's something that we're seeing in the Star Wars universe as well, repeatedly. I think the next piece of that puzzle is also budgetary. Now, this is the number one priority for HBO Max Discovery Zaslav Incorporated, of course, and it is returning on the investment.
Sure.
They are not skimping on this show.
No.
But it is still a business. And there was a dragon in this episode. Brief, but there was a dragon that bumped into a boat on a CGI ocean.
Yeah.
That's costs amortized or whatever over a season. That's why you don't have Arya and the Hound. You know what I mean? Like, that's why you don't have 4 sets in 5 countries.
Well,
it is.
I'm trying to
It also makes it easier for them.
I'm trying to be patient. You know, like, I think that there is a school of thought. There is like a sort of discourse out there that, like, a lot of what we're seeing in these first few episodes would, in another show or if it was a film, be the voiceover preamble, you know, and that we're getting a lot of history before we inevitably get, and I don't think this is a spoiler because it's been so well documented, this time jump where the cast changes, you know, and where we get different versions of Alicent and Rhaenyra. Yeah. And so when that happens, I do wonder whether the show then locks into what it is. And I assume, the way things are going, that there will be a schism soon that separates these characters and forces this show to be outside of just 5 people snooping on one another in a castle. Yeah,
I think that I know I gotta let go of this, because this is not an argument I'm going to win. This is an argument that's settled, and the success of the shows, you know, proves it in the open and free marketplace. You know, shout out to the Iron Bank. I don't really like shows that are previously ons for 6 episodes. I don't really appreciate shows that feel they need to like lay historical groundwork before they get to the show that they might be or want to be or that might be better. Like, it doesn't really work for me, honestly. And we haven't even done the time jump yet, to your point. Like, we know, and I don't think this is a spoiler, that other actors are coming to play these parts. That we're going to be telling other parts of their lives, I would guess, soon. But what does that do for our relationship to this version of them if it's all preamble? You know, it does keep you at a remove. And I mean this sincerely, I think that the people working on this show, whether it's Ryan Condal, Miguel Sapochnik, who was his co-showrunner for this season and who has removed himself from the future seasons, they are doling this out in ways that are just inarguably successful. Mm-hmm. You know, the episodes are paced well. The
and entertaining.
Set piece and entertaining. Yeah. The set pieces, when they come, are welcome. And, you know, I know there actually was a group of, you know, a large segment of the fandom that almost enjoyed doing Game of Thrones as a second screen thing, because you could just constantly be like learning the history while you were watching or whatever. Mm-hmm. I think this show is very, very well paced to avoid a second screen thing, because you're never quite sure what's going to happen next. And there's always a little bit of violence or sex or intrigue. It's well done. It's well argued. But I think that I am a little, I wish I cared, I guess. Is that maybe that's the more simple way to put it. You know?
I think that there's, I mean, you know, I'm trying to, I was pretty instantly smitten with Game of Thrones once I started watching it, which was, there was a little bit of a delay before I started watching it, because I think I had some skepticism for the genre and just being like, do I want to watch something like that?
That's because we pranked you and told you there were hobbits in it.
Do you think that there's like an issue maybe with the variety of characters that we're seeing? Like, I was thinking about why we keep getting these scenes of guys sitting at that table and being like, well, here's here's the sort of chessboard that we're looking at, and here's who Rhaenyra needs to marry to like offset the losses that we would experience if this happens, or maybe we just need to swallow it and Rhaenyra needs to marry Corlys's son again, like all this stuff that they're kind of doing. And, the show goes into a completely different gear anytime Matt Smith's on the screen, but because he keeps getting ostracized from the kingdom, he's only in it, like I would say 20%, 30% of the time. So you're kind of leaving out the most electric performance and electric character that you've got. But he's so volatile that I understand, Daemon can't just be there all the time being like, I'll take a fourth wife and why don't we just do this? And I'm going to do that.
He's not, he has made his polyamory clear on all of his social media profiles. You know what I mean?
It's true.
Like he is not just here to make friends. I get it. But he's not doing great. Like how many years has he been like, I could take a second wife.
Also,
like,
I want to see what's the first wife's deal.
He's not, first of all, talk about slander. I mean, if she is going to be the new Vera from Cheers.
Has she just been in Highgarden for like 6 years, just being like, he said he was going to be away for a week. She's
at Mar-a-Lago, isn't she? Isn't that his keep?
She's not in Dragonstone.
She's not there. Where is she?
Mysario was in Dragonstone, and then she seems to have bounced and now is back in King's Landing and was like rehabbing Daemon. Was like, get the fuck out.
I had a really serious question about that. So was she just like, I'm going to get an apartment in the city? Was that like a pied-à-terre for her?
I'm going to ask Mal and Joe when we record, but like I did not understand that. I didn't understand. They had that breakup scene, I guess, sort of, where she was just like, you put a target on my back because you said I'm pregnant, but I'm not.
But I didn't understand that was a breakup scene, because then I guess he spent 3 more years hunting, fresh crustaceans.
Well, maybe that's why she left. She was just like, you're too into your work.
Have you asked Mallory? Mallory's from Baltimore. Have you talked to her about crab cakes?
Extensively.
That's come up? Okay, good.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? Like, I want to see the spice market, but I want to see the Old Bay vendor who's just like, for 3 years, had the best market bubble. You know what I mean? When like crabs were really, really popular.
Yeah.
And then suddenly the bottom fell out.
This show, you know what I'm getting at? And I think this show needs a North. This show needs, what's the other part of the world? Like this, like right now we're all in King's Landing. We're all in the small council room. Everybody's a general or a politician. They all chat with each other about like what should or shouldn't be done. The difference is that in the original show, there was a whole other part, 2 other parts. There was the Dany plot and there was the Starks plot outside of King's Landing.
But also there were 2, potentially more, I might not be counting them correctly, absolutely existential threats that were going to, we understood on a, granular level, even before we knew what the world was, going to touch all of these disparate things. So winter was coming. I mean, in the Game of Thrones pilot, it begins with the White Walkers before then we get into the rest of the world. And then then the dire wolves and everything else. So that was the marker laid down that this was going to be the story eventually. And it was going to be major. We would, they'd be unspooling it slowly. And then the season ended with, wait, there might be dragons too?
Right.
So in this world, the threats are, I guess, Corlys is big mad still?
No,
like,
I mean,
that's
I
the
think
threat?
I think that they're, well, so I think this show will ultimately be about a Targaryen civil war, right? Like isn't this, I think that is where we go. And please, I'm not trying to be falsely stupid about this. I think that this is more about a family at the head of power of this realm tearing itself apart. Maybe. And then there is also now this added wrinkle of a Targaryen inheritance that is the knowledge of the prince who was promised, and that they are like somehow guardians of this knowledge that one day we're going to need to have a king, a prince who comes along to defend the world against this unnamed evil, right? Which is what we see in Game of Thrones.
That's pretty weak mead to me, because that's the business of the 7 seasons of the other show, so that's just punting it to then. I just continue to wish we had a little more, if it's going to be about the Targaryens, like let's get into it. There are some dynamics here.
How much more into it can we get though?
Well, I guess let's get some perspective on it.
Right.
a little bit outside reflecting perspective. But if we're going to stay internal within the castle walls, this episode did something that I think was overdue, but I wish it went further. Like I and this is first season stuff too, right? Like the dials aren't always correct on the big mixing board behind the scenes. Like you figure out the show as you're making it and as you're watching it and as people are watching it. And so there's no reason to think some of these things can't be tweaked and adjusted. But the scene between Allison and Rhaenyra, where it's just like, I kind of wish you were still my friend. Like, let's yes and that. And the reason we're not friends is because you're sleeping with my dad and gave birth to my usurper brother. Like, let's talk about it. Let's go a step further in how deeply fucked up and weird this is among the 6 people who live in this big house. You know what I mean? Like,
I wish that,
but there's
like,
no room for
you were like a mandolin player in that courtyard and you could just slide right into that scene and be like, we're not talking about what's really in between the two of you right now, guys.
I don't think I'm a mandolin player. I'm like the family therapist in the first season of Succession who breaks his face
Strauss.
in the hot tub.
You're Dr.
Or I'm Dr. Strauss from The Patient. I am definitely chained down in the crypts.
And you're like, Viserys, I just don't think that we can really engage in therapy while I'm chained.
And he's like, but I brought a Dornish curry for you today.
Yeah, right.
I am definitely into that mashup. It's so okay, but let's do power rankings here because again, we are in the weeds of the show, which remains kind of a marvel in terms of its production quality and its scope. And again, its professionalism at being Game of Thrones. Like it's so hard. And so when I pick nits about the character motivations or the, particular like MC Escher-esque couplings that we glimpse in the pleasure houses, I don't want to give short shrift to the hundreds of people who are making this happen.
You're not. We're just having
crazy.
A conversation. It's okay.
No, I know. But I also do think that in the spirit of like, I think when we talk about shows, we try to talk about them like, 360. We talk about all the aspects of them and including their place in the marketplace or whatever. Like it's wild that they are delivering on this to the degree that they are. This is unquestionably Game of Thrones, even if they hadn't just bogarted the theme music to lull us into submission at the start of every hour.
It helps.
But it helps.
Yeah.
But what are your, Chris Ryan, Game of Thrones superfan, podcaster extraordinaire, what's your power rankings of people? Is Daemon your number one in terms of who's the character that I'm interested in?
He is coming out of the Eastern Conference as the definitive number one seed. I just think that he's like obviously a piece of shit, but is kind of the most interesting person that's been on one of these shows in a while, and I think that, Game of Thrones like kind of sanded down their characters over the years. And I think a lot of the main characters, with the exception of Cersei and a few others, were sort of directed towards being pretty good guys, like especially in that last season where it was like, you're either on this side or that side. And he has got like that old school amazing combination of Jaime, Tyrion, Littlefinger, just that kind of like not only bad boy, but also like, what do you want? Because that's the most interesting thing about the Targaryens is that, and I thought about this watching my second favorite character, which is Otto.
Yes.
Where I'm like, what's the goal here? Is it sustained and uninterrupted shadow power? Is it being the grandfather of the king? Which is what you would be if Aegon had been named. Is it, seeing Viserys deposed and having Alicent be queen with you basically being the puppet master, like all these things. And I find like those sort of like questions to be really interesting facing those characters. Third, and I would say probably in a real world, I would say in certain episodes, second is Rhaenyra. I do think that Millie Alcock's doing a great job. I think that it's a challenging role to... How old is she supposed to be? 17? Like what? I think
she's up to 16, 17 now. Yeah.
I think she's doing a great job, and I think Rhaenyra is obviously like a fascinating character. I think that the restrictions placed on women in the world that she is in restricts her character a little bit.
Yeah, I agree, and I guess it it would be curious. I'd be curious to see if there was an era that they could have chosen in this completely made up timeline where maybe it was different. Maybe there was a time where it was more matriarchal or where there was more. And I'm not trying to like make it game of woke. I'm just like, we know, we get it. We understand the restrictions placed on these powerful, ambitious, smart, capable women. And you're not really teaching us lessons anymore. You're just sort of circling it. And I think my other, Chris, thank you for your positive explanation. Let me add one more criticism to the pot. I didn't mean to be as negative, but there's some things that I'm finding frustrating. And I love the character of Otto because I love Rhys Ifans, and I just think he's such a powerful actor that his presence changes the gravity of the scenes that he's in. But I also think the character thus far is not necessarily worthy of his gravity and intelligence, because his plan is, I'm going to send my daughter to the king, and then I'm just going to hang out. Littlefinger is a great example because Littlefinger was absolutely devious, but also brilliant and scheming and good at chess. So he was a few moves ahead.
He also you're going to say the same thing I was going to say.
He was in love with Kat Stark.
Bang.
That's exactly the thing. So he had a part of his character, an essential part of his character, that was deeply human and vulnerable.
It was irrational. Like everything that the Can to the King or all these political actors are always doing things that are like so considered and manipulative. But he had this one weakness.
Yes.
Was that he still thought that he could get with this woman that he was in love with from his childhood, even though she was married to Ned and then eventually his widow and then eventually the mother of the King of the North. So it was like, dude, it's not going to happen. But he let that govern so many of his decisions.
Yeah, and I would love a character on this show to have one piece like that. Just add one more Lego brick to the construction here. And we are wrapping our arms around Damon because his passions are so strong and the performance is so great. And he runs counter to everyone else, which just makes him naturally more charismatic and interesting. But even if you strip that down, I don't know what motivates him yet. Mm-hmm. I mean, being super into your niece maybe is an interesting and unique motivation. I can't comment. But is it just power? Is it just being the second son?
What he says to Viserys is, I want to marry Rhaenyra. And what is he like? He essentially is like purify the Targaryen bloodline and like return to the like sort of terrifying power that this family is capable of. Because Viserys doesn't ride dragons. Viserys is literally falling to pieces. Viserys is, well liked but kind of ineffectual. He gets dominated by the people on his small council more often than not. And I think that Daemon is like, we keep it inside the family in all senses of the word, and nobody can fuck with us because, as I just proved with the crab feeder, if push comes to shove, I'm just going to get on this dragon and regulate.
Yeah, I agree. I think it, like with everything with the show, it comes down to the Targaryens. And if that's what the show is about, and if that is the furnace that is powering it, okay, but let's make sure we have the right perspective on it and we're invested in it and it's as interesting as it could be. Because power for the sake of power, like rooting for the Targaryens to stay king because they've been king, kind of not only runs counter to dramatic interest and audience interest, it runs counter to George Martin's entire project, at least as far as I understood it. And right. So again, it's just a question of where you lay down your stakes. And with a show as well-funded and as successful and potentially as nimble in terms of chronology and history as this is all fixable and may, in fact, already have been fixed. As you said, this may just be prologue that will hang over everything.
Yeah.
In
and
an
we'll be like,
shadow.
Remember how those first 6 episodes were like this? And yeah.
But this is also, I should say, this is also, to have conversations like this is why we choose to watch these shows week to week. We could have watched the first 6, I think, and we chose not to because I think it's more interesting to be in it. To be, to put on our stinking robes and pretend to be page boys and hook up with family members. Kaya, strike that last part.
This episode is brought to you by Mint Mobile. New Year's resolutions are fun, the first couple of weeks. Then you kind of maybe conveniently forget about them halfway through January. No shame. It happens to us all. But this year I have a foolproof plan, at least when it comes to saving money. Just switch to Mint Mobile and you're done. Goal accomplished, because for a limited time, their wireless plans are $15 a month when you buy a 3-month plan. The great thing about Mint Mobile is there's no jaw-dropping monthly bills or unexpected overages, and all plans come with unlimited talk and text. Get this new customer offer today at mintmobile.com/watch. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. You might say all kinds of stuff when things go wrong, but these are the words you really need to remember. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. They've got options to fit your unique insurance needs, meaning you can talk to your agent to choose the coverage you need. Have coverage options to protect the things you value most. File a claim right on the State Farm mobile app, and even reach a real person when you need to talk to someone. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
TaxAct knows you don't look forward to taxes. TaxAct doesn't even look forward to taxes, and TaxAct is a tax software company. It's basically TaxAct's whole thing. If TaxAct did things over, maybe TaxAct would end up teaching kindergarten or leading fly fishing tours. But that's a different story for a different ad. So why don't we just agree that taxes aren't fun, but you still have to do them? TaxAct's filing software can help you do that. TaxAct. Let's get them over with.
It's hard not to add a side of hot, crispy hash browns to your favorite McDonald's breakfast. It's even harder not to eat said hash browns before you get home. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
So should we touch rings a little bit before we
I
get
do
out of
want
here?
to touch these rings. So the third episode came out last night. It was the first one that wasn't directed by J.A. Bayona, and I thought, while I noticed there were some differences in the filmmaking, I didn't think that it was a huge drop off at all. And
no, I just want to say, Wayne Yip, great director. I thought he did a great job. And
I thought I think I realized one of the things that's really like sort of energizing about watching what is essentially like, with all due respect, like a pretty corny show in terms of like, it's a Lord of the Rings show. So it's like very, very high fantasy. And it's also like the characters, I think, are very sincere for the most part, and very, there's Harfoots and elves and stuff. So it's not like, I'm not going to it to like draw comparisons to contemporary society or anything like that, like, which is totally fine. This show moves very fast though. Like, there's not only like, does it cut between these multiple storylines that they're telling, and they've introduced, I think, quite deftly, but there is a lot of movement and action within the scenes. The Harfoots are on the road. Mm-hmm. Like, the elves are always running from one place to another to sort of investigate this rising threat. And speaking of that rising threat, you made a really good point about like, well, in Thrones, from the second it started, there was this danger in it that we were trying to figure out. And then by the end of the first season, there's the dragons. And then multiple seasons in, you have this prophecy that we're trying to figure out. I think that honestly, like, though, like, what is happening with these tunnels and these orcs and this Adar guy, like, I know what that is, it's like a good motivating darkness that's creeping on the edges of this show. So I think that your mileage may vary on some of the some of the dialogue or whatever, but like, I'm enjoying the velocity of the show, I guess is what I should say.
Yeah, I think and the velocity shows up in different ways too, because the show is absolutely doing world building. And I didn't know, I'm going to be honest with you guys, about Numenor. Is that right? the chill island where people are just like, we're Greece now, and honeymooners not welcome. But there wasn't that much backstory to it, right? Like, there's some dialogue with Galadriel explaining like, oh, this is what this place is, but we're just there.
And it has a little bit of that, the E.L. Doctorow, like, I went into the bathroom and Teddy Roosevelt was there, like, historical fiction vibe, where
E.L. Doctorow.
Isildur is like literally like the most important person other than Frodo, and like the whole fucking like history of the world there.
Is that true?
Yeah.
I don't know. Oh, that's cool. That's chill. I mean, guys, this is our first time really talking about the show. And just so you know, I texted Chris last night and I was like, yo, orcs can talk? Did not know that. I was like, oh, this is like when they went from slow zombies to fast zombies, because now these guys talk like they're let's make
cocky.
another.
Yeah.
I was like, are they just E.M. Forster side characters that teach the main characters about how they should hold on to their steady sinecures and jobs in the clerk's office?
Right.
No, they're just Cockney dudes with bad skin.
I
didn't know
wonder
that.
what it is.
I don't know anything about this.
Because I would love to know. I'm sure that there's in some like appendix an explanation for why they don't like the sun, but they're not vampires, right?
Yeah. No, Chris, I mean, they're a little bit like you and your wife, right? Like they're just like, we could be out here this weekend, but we choose not to be.
No. Don't besmirch me. I tan very well. I just don't tan well on the Pacific side.
Pacific side of your body? What are you talking
I find that the sun on the West Coast either doesn't work or burns me. But when I go to the East Coast, I look like Don Johnson in 1984. It's true. My legs still look good from my trip to Maine.
Can we do an extra podcast today, Kaya? Because we have to end this one soon, but I have a lot to talk about.
Wait, do you actually not think that there's a difference between the way the sun feels on the West Coast and the East Coast? Is that just me?
Well, I think that the way that it appears in the sky in terms of its vengeance and at what times is quite different. Like you can burn here when it's cloudy, in a different way, or it could just pop out and be like, hello, I have reduced you to ash. But broadly speaking, no, I think it's the same fire orb. Okay. But I think the orcs. We
should do the Panama Jack challenge where we put on like zero SPF tanning oil at the very same time on separate coasts and see who gets more tan.
It's rewatchable Sexy Beast, but it's just we're just recreating it. I want to know what the SPF of those orc rags are, because they seem effective enough. Right. Is my point. Okay, so no, I had no idea that any of these people are important or what the hell's going on. And I'm okay with that. The show, I actually do think I'm a good test case for this, because when the show is moving, I respond to it.
Yes.
When it does things that, again, I'm watching these shows in tandem, as is to a degree, the world. So I think it is impossible not to compare them. But I really, maybe more so than I ought to if I was watching it alone, but moments of friendship or connection, like when Galadriel goes to the old library law offices or whatever, and it's like, these scrolls are interesting, and they're like, we'd like to help you, elf.
War. Yeah.
Or, when the stranger is like, we're friends now, like he's like the Hulk, he's like, we friends. Like, I'm like, that's so nice that you live in a fictional fantasy universe where you could be friends. That's part of life too. That's nice. Game of Thrones doesn't have any of that. So I appreciate that.
Okay.
I think that that's being well done. At times I think this show is also still figuring out how to tell these stories in a modern way. And, I am not going to fall into the trap of like, are we sure we still want to be telling these stories 60, 70 years on? I don't know how much meat is left on these bones. Regardless of that argument, which is a dead end, I was struck by how when the Cockney orcs slit the elf's throat, the elf was like, oh, I retire to my bedchamber and expire. Which I was like, oh, I guess this is a show for kids where like no blood comes out of the jugular vein. Minutes later, in the same scene,
Halbrand busts a dude's skull open and the blood flies onto the camera lens, Saving Private Ryan style.
Yeah, my main elf dude is like, let me take your arm. Let me now just change. Let me just Lawrence Taylor it.
That guy's he's not an elf.
Who's not an elf?
Halbrand. He's a dude.
I thought the dude who does the arm breaking is our main elf guy.
No, he's a guy. He breaks that guy's arm. He's not an elf. He's just traveling.
Elf? Chris? Who's the elf that's our POV elf?
Galadriel.
In the elf.
The lady.
No, the dude. The dude who's in love with the human from Homeland. Who's the prisoner.
Who's from Homeland?
The woman who makes the tinctures. She was on Homeland. She was good. But I'm not talking about her. She's the human who lives in the town. She has an illicit thing with the elf ranger.
Oh,
right?
Bronwyn. Yeah, her. Right, for sure.
But what's the elf's name?
Oh, Arendir.
Are we sure? You're making
so.
that. You are 100%.
No, that dude's in prison.
In the Pacific Sun.
That guy is basically in the raid too. That guy who does like all the violence on the orcs and stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
The one who's like, I will cut down the tree, but I will whisper an apology to it.
Yes.
Like Francis Mallman cooking meat.
I thought you were talking about the dude in Nuramore who's like, I am now going to break this guy's arm against a wall.
Oh, I mixed it up. Yeah, that's when that happened. I'm sorry. So
Yeah.
I was the source of confusion there. The orcs were just sort of like chained to death.
Yes.
Broadly. Yes. The other arm. What's the human's name?
Hallbrand.
Cool. That's actually a pretty dope name. I would choose that name.
I wish my name was Hallbrand.
I'm super into that.
Yeah.
Right. So just in terms of like, where is this story pitched, right? Like the people aren't really, they don't make jokes. They don't have subtext. And yet sometimes they could snap people's bodies like twigs. It's finding its way. It's finding its way. But one thing that I appreciated, I must say, is that in the set piece at the end, the sort of the jailbreak that doesn't really go great, I liked that the fighting was elevated in a sort of like Hong Kong action movie kind of way that felt elevated in the same way the genre storytelling is elevated. Like, let's make this kind of, maybe there's a word in German for it. Like, let's make all of this look like it should be on a tapestry. I kind of liked the way that was sort of kicked up out of reality into that space. I enjoyed that scene a lot. I did want to note that the wolf pig that is loosed upon them was the first evidence I've seen that maybe some of the CGI houses were busy making She-Hulk twerk that week. Like, it was real Harryhausen, which I was into, but I don't think it was supposed to be. You know what I mean? Like that. Prior to that in this episode, I was like, Amazon just locked down the houses, the real houses. It's really not about uniting the houses.
I was thinking about this the other day because like
the CGI's been good.
You know, when they're pulling into Nuramore, and it's like, I gotta admit, like at first I was like, this looks like a Magic Eye poster, and then it like the more you went into it, I was like, damn, they got some good statues up in here. Like they got I'm really interested in like what's the vibe in this spot, because it seems incredibly clean. Yeah, you know, like
I felt the same way. But also like they did do detail. It kept going where I was like, oh, they thought about this.
This would be really funny is if one of these shows that they're like, we're going to spend $250 million on this first season or whatever, they like hired like Werner Herzog to do it. And he was like, I must make everything practical effects and build the city of Nuramore from the ground up. And like basically like bankrupted Amazon because he built half a statue.
It was like, I finished.
Yeah, my work here is done.
My labors have finished. Weren't enough dwarves in this episode for me, though.
I know, but I think you're going to get them next week. They were in the coming attractions. Durin back.
The other question I had was, what's the guy's name? Hallbrand?
Yeah,
that's so cool. Will you call me that just to try it out?
Yeah,
maybe
sure.
Like next time we go out.
I'll change your name in my phone to that.
That would be great.
And then I'll change the picture. It comes up when you call me to that dude.
Great. You'll pick up all the time. You'll be so excited. My only thing with that guy is, you know, he's a guest there. He's you know, he's just hanging out. He's like the first, it's like the Meiji Restoration in Japan. Like they were like, nobody comes in and then one guy gets let in and he goes right to the tavern and suddenly he's just throwing coin around. Suddenly he's flashing money. And so I asked you, does just everyone accept the euro? Like, does he just happen to have the right?
I think he got a per diem. You know what I mean? Like, I think when they were like, because there is a weird thing where they're like, you're not our prisoners, but you can't leave.
Does he have to keep his receipts?
I don't know. Like, I don't know what maybe there's like an internal program, like a you know, like a workplace kind of software that he eventually has to upload those things. I'm not sure.
Oh God, those things can be such a drag.
Yeah.
Do you think they have staplers there?
That would be funny if he was like, hold on, let me just take a picture of this before we go.
Wait, also, can we just talk one moment? Have you ever made the same face that Galadriel made when the guy was like, would you like to ride a horse?
No.
I've never been that happy in my life. I would love to be that happy once.
Yeah. I don't have anything else for us today. We were produced by Kaya McMullen. We'll be back next Sunday. I think that Nerd Out Sunday nights.
We got to
They're
come up
working
with a
for
name.
us. Yeah. What do you? Well, maybe Kaya can as a passive.
Six-sided die Sundays. There's something to be done here.
That's good.
What? But we're going to be back before then. Is this how
We'll
you're
be
telling
back
me
on
that
Thursday?
is Hallbrand
down to
co-hosting
1
with you?
week.
That was a savage way to do it.
Well, he broke my arm, you know? Andy, it was great seeing you. Have a great weekend, or I guess your weekend's over because it's Sunday night. Have a great week, and I'll see you on Thursday.
When people are listening to this, they've already seen the Eagles game. So they're very curious if they're happy or not for us.
We got to let that dog out of the cage. That's what Nick Sirianni said. Turn my music up.
Was he talking about the wolf pig? Is that what it looks like?
Nick Sirianni.
It's like a little bit misshapen.
Or captain. All right, man. Talk to you soon.
Bye.